And the story is about the BRICS Summit. Amid the standoff along the line of actual control, all eyes were on whether there would be any kind of a formal bilateral between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and China's President Xi Jinping. Well, there's no confirmation of any kind of bilateral. However, there's a statement that was made by the Ministry of External Affairs that Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke to China's President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit in Johannesburg and highlighted concerns that India has about the border issues. Now, according to the Ministry of External Affairs, Prime Minister Modi underlined the maintenance of peace and tranquility. These are issues which are critical for restoration of peace and normalcy between the two countries. It was also argued by the Minister of External Affairs that the Prime Minister has reiterated India's position and said that one must respect national sovereignty, respecting the borders and respecting the line of actual control are essential for the normalization of relationship between India and China. Well, will the talks in the future be something that we can look at? There are multiple friction points along the LAC where tensions continue to be there. There have been different level of talks that have happened. Much more needs to be done. The BRICS Summit in many ways was a huge success, keeping in mind the inclusion of new countries that has happened and the ambitious tasks that the geopolitical leaders have highlighted. More importantly, despite the bilateral problems between the different nations which are the key members of BRICS, including India and China, there has been some kind of consensus on various geopolitical issues, and India, Prime Minister Modi continues to assert on giving the due credit of resources or sharing technology and knowledge with the global south. Our focus on brass tacks tonight.
Conversation with President Xi Jinping of China, Prime Minister highlighted India's concerns on the unresolved issues along the LAC in the western sector of the India-China border areas.
decode diplomacy at the BRICS and what essentially that conversation, quote unquote, between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping really means. Joining us on the broadcast are the experts. We have Dr. Tara Karta, who's a distinguished fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. We also have Professor Victor Gao, who's the Vice President at the Center for China and Globalization, also the Chair Professor at the Social University. Fred Ver is also joining us on the broadcast, who's an expert on Russian affairs and a political analyst. Good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Dr. Karta, I want you to open this discussion for us. More importantly, what the Ministry of External Affairs has just said in its statement. Prime Minister highlighting the concerns of Indians, especially vis-a-vis the LAC, to the Chinese president. I believe this is not the final formal bilateral that we can talk about, but what does this conversation really mean?
See, as the Foreign Minister Jaishankar said, India-China don't have a normal relationship. I mean, we cannot have that until we get this going. So you have places like BRICS is where you can actually have some kind of a chat with the other side. Though I don't know how much of a chat this is, given that it was just 5 minutes. But nonetheless, the fact that we've been saying over and over again that until the border issue is resolved, normal relations cannot go on, and so on and so forth. So the fact that BRICS we are the second largest, we are the only, what shall I say, the weight in BRICS for the global south. I mean, we are supposed to be the voice of the global south. But talking to China, by the way, we don't know what happened to President Xi when he kind of disappeared, didn't make the speech, so there's that little mystery going on there.
Right.
But apart from that, I think we have a standing, because this is about Africa, right? We have a standing in Africa that is rapidly catching up with that of China.
Yeah.
China $200 billion trade, they're reaching $1 billion soon. So it's been a phenomenal rise. It's been really, really amazing. I think since 2015 onwards, when we had the first Africa Summit and so on, where you can see the difference. What I'm talking about, the two sides, how we approach things. I mean, China's the speech which was read out for the president, talked about solidarity and all the rest of it, peace and friendship between countries. Where is the peace and friendship here?
Sure.
At least let's get this thing going. If you want to have a normal relationship with India, which is a weight in BRICS, which is a weight in Africa, and you want to get all these changes going, the first thing you have to do is to settle the border issue.
Okay. Professor Victor Gao, I'm sure Dr. Tara Karta has highlighted the concerns of India, especially along the LAC, the concerns that remain about national security and border peace. The fact that there was no official bilateral, but a conversation for roughly a few minutes on the sidelines, informal conversation. How do you see that? And more importantly, how would the Chinese perceive the statement coming in from the Ministry of External Affairs?
Professor? To congratulate. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, sir. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. First of all, please allow me to congratulate India, the Indian government, and the Indian people for the successful soft landing on the moon.
Thank you.
And this is an extraordinary achievement. We are very proud of you. And I think the fact that before the enlargement of BRICS, India became one of the only 4 countries succeeded in the soft landing on the moon, and 3 of the 4 countries were actually BRICS members. This is very significant for all the BRICS member countries. And now we have 11 official members of the BRICS. I think we are all very, very proud of that. So, first of all, congratulations. Secondly,
Yes.
I think the fact that President Xi Jinping of China and Prime Minister Modi met on the sidelines of BRICS was in itself a very positive thing. Between China and India, we need to meet more. We need to have more formal meetings, informal meetings of all kinds between the leaders of the 2 countries. And allow me to emphasize, yes, indeed, there are territorial disputes between China and India. However, allow me to emphasize that these territorial disputes were not created by either India or China. They were created by the British colonial rulers in India before they left India. And I emphasize that neither China nor India should be held hostage by the bad legacy left by the British. We need to have wisdom and vision and the courage to do the right thing between the 2 biggest nations in the world and put the territorial disputes behind us rather than being burdened down by the disputes. And then we, the 2 largest populations, need to do what's the right thing for the 2 nations and for the 2 people. After all, we are the superpopulations, and we need to not only shoulder a lot of responsibilities for ourselves, but we need to set up good examples for mankind as a whole. And now that China and India are increasingly important, I really look forward to the day when India would be among the top 3 economies in the world.
Well, I really appreciate your sense of optimism, Professor Gao, and I really wish that it's shared by the Chinese official leadership as well. Mr. Fred, what is your understanding? I mean, Russia has been one country which has often spoken of the fact that India and China should resolve the disputes amicably. But as far as the global community is concerned, and this conversation on the sidelines is concerned, we'll talk about BRICS at large, but how optimistic are you that these repeated meetings or encounters between the Indians and the Chinese premier can really solve the dispute in the longer run?
Well, Russia is of course one of the founding members of this bloc, which is fast expanding. And it's sort of unfortunate that Vladimir Putin didn't have the opportunity to directly participate.
Yes.
In this one, he addressed the meeting remotely, of course, because this process, the BRICS plus the G20, these are incredibly important for Russia at the present moment, precisely because they find themselves in confrontation with the West more acutely than anyone else right now. So for Russia, these organizations are a really vital alternative forum. So yes, I think Russia supports the expansion of the BRICS.
Yes.
It certainly hopes for cooperation, expanded cooperation and rapprochement between China and India. I think that's a given for Russia because if there was any serious falling out, I mean, if things should grow acute over this border issue and other things, this would be disastrous for this very process that Russia stakes so heavily on. So that in some ways, Russia is even a bit of an outlier right now. Although it's a central, it sees itself as central. It's China and India that took center stage today, quite rightly.
Okay.
And the whole process, it is Russia's watching it closely. It's heavily covered in the news here. And
well,
the
Ukraine crisis was not mentioned directly, but somewhere it was said, and it was said vis-a-vis the Ukraine crisis, that one needs to resolve the crisis in a peaceful and in an amicable manner.
I think Russia is just happy at the neutral stance.
Yes.
Of countries like India, unlike the Americans, they're not eager to whip you into the crusade. I think that for Russia, this the way things are is satisfactory, and they're quite understanding of the more neutral stance of most of these countries.
Dr. Tara, the inclusion of new members, the invitation to countries like Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia to become full-time members of BRICS, the concerns about the global south that have been voiced and reiterated by India. Many point out that this entire cooperation between the BRIC members, key founding members of the BRICS, have happened despite the bilateral differences that may exist, say, between India and China. The fact that this feat has been achieved and meet ended on a positive note, does this signal the expansion of BRICS, the expansion of its powers, of its sway as a regional cooperation?
Well, to be honest, I don't really know what the BRICS is about. It's not, there's not a commonality between members.
Yes.
Like, there are different systems, you've got different objectives. And it may just work out. I mean, look, for example, at the new member, Ethiopia, for example, I think he's got a debt of some 13 billion to China. Right? So that's the first restructuring which has taken place. Argentina has just done a debt repayment through IMF to China, because they had taken a currency swap from China. They took a debt from IMF to repay China. So these are the two new members, also in very bad economic strait. Saudis, of course, their entry, in fact, is quite a signal, because that is a petrodollar state.
Yes.
They are entering the BRICS. So this is interesting stuff which is going on, and so is the UAE. But again, I'm saying the key here is, can China and India bring their, no doubt, common interests together on this?
But Dr. Tara, the fact that there are various Western superpowers which are very keenly eyeing what's happening at the BRICS. I was reading about what the French president said and how the Western powers are looking at the developments really happening. I do get what you're saying, that there is no cohesive agenda which this regional cooperation is pursuing at this point in time. Then what makes the Western superpowers so interesting?
Well, it has a lot of potential. That's what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
For example, if India and China, just on climate, just takes just one issue, climate, if we both countries get together and tackle climate change, it could be huge.
Sure.
It would be massive change. That's one. But you see, just now you had, for example, the president, Chinese president just met Sheikh Hasina, and said, you should be part of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah.
What kind of a signal is that to us? So if you get these contradictory signals from China, and then you don't know what to make of it, at least I'm sure somebody else does, but I certainly don't.
Professor Victor Gao, I believe that's an interesting point that Dr. Tara is talking about, that it's one thing to come together on stage and have these lovely pictures clicked off or talk about all the cooperation, but is the national agenda or the national interest of two countries like India and China, which are the growing powers of the world, do they really have anything in common? Let's take this example, the Belt and Road Initiative and the invitation extended to Sheikh Hasina about, we can have this initiative in Bangladesh. That will send alarm bells ringing here in India.
Allow me to emphasize one point. I listened very carefully to the distinguished madam who made her point. I think what makes BRICS before the enlargement and after the enlargement very unique is as follows. First of all, there are some Western countries who keep talking about they represent the international community. However, the reality is that for the BRICS, especially after the enlargement, they are a very important part of the international community. They represent a key part of the global south. And I hope those Western countries will realize when they say they represent the international community, I need to ask them whether they represent the BRICS countries, for example, whether they consulted with the BRICS member states. And if they haven't, and if they don't represent the BRICS view, they cannot hold themselves out as representing the international community. That means the BRICS countries do have a way to project their voices and to project what's their aspiration, for example. Secondly, I think BRICS would promote peace, stability, development, whereas there are other groups of people which are promoting Cold War or even hot war or confrontation, for example. They are not really focused on economic development, lifting people out of poverty, as almost all the BRICS countries are dedicated to do now. For the BRICS members, especially after enlargement, every member of the BRICS organization has its own specific circumstances, opportunities, and challenges. But one thing is certain. We all need stability. We all want to promote peace. We want to use peace and diplomacy and dialogue to solve whatever problems there are.
Absolutely. Let's hope, Professor Gao, that the national interests of these two powers, India and China, really come to a common point. Dr. Tara Kanta, Professor Victor Gao and Fred Ware, thank you. Thank you for joining us on the broadcast. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the BRICS Summit, the success, the achievements, and what can be done. Well, as we talk about this very important story, much has been achieved at BRICS, much needed to be done in the days to come, but that crucial statement that has been made by the Minister of External Affairs today about what happened on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit indeed is an interesting development. Can we have more such conversations? Perhaps so, and hoping the LAC issue is resolved very, very soon. It's a wrap on this edition of Rough Stacks. Thank you so much for watching.
presented by